Hi everyone, my battery's low and I'm waiting for the bus, so I'm going to try to spit out an idea quick and see if I can make myself be a bit more condensed. So the idea is that the Redwall books by Brian Jakes and Zootopia are both stories about anthropomorphized animals that make for an interesting comparison because I think they have very different worldviews, and both of them are relevant to discussions about race and racism in some way. So Zootopia is a Disney movie. It's been on Netflix for free. Almost everyone's seen it, talked about it. I just recommend you go watch Hot Diggity Demons video, Brain Dump, on Zootopia, and if you can find it, maybe Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire podcast on Zootopia, because that almost says everything I think needs to be said about Zootopia and racism. The only thing I'd add that I don't think I saw in those videos is I think the morality of Zootopia is confusing. It doesn't really know what its message is or how to use the animal characters to make a moral parable, and the result is the moral of the movie is itself confusing. You don't know what you're supposed to take out of it coming away, except maybe that microaggressions are bad. And it's an example of something that's very beautiful artistically, very huge care to detail, to the characters, to their emotion, expression, and body language, everything I love. But the confusing morality sort of is like a little snake venom mixed in with the sugar. It kind of hurts the total effect of what could have been an amazingly great movie. So the contrast to that I want to make is the Redwall books by Brian Jakes. And you may have grown up reading these in the 90s. If you didn't, they are kind of generic adventure stories with mice and other woodland characters in a very simplified medieval setting. So, the bad guys will use siege equipment and stuff, but it's not like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings where there's all this dense historical information. They're fun little adventure stories. And one of the reasons I like them is the very first villain in Redwall, Clooney the Scourge, is a Genghis Khan type of villain. I was originally going to call him a Darth Vader type of villain, but that's too vague. He's a Genghis Khan villain. Clooney the Scourge loves to conquer and destroy everything and be a warlord. He hates incompetence and he punishes incompetence with death. And this is a cool villain. And we kind of live in a time where people don't like that kind of villain. They tend to like the more sympathetic villain, the villain who was misunderstood as a child and maybe thinks that they're doing something moral. And there's this sort of general opinion that if it's a villain who is evil and loves being evil, this is uninteresting or this is naive. And I don't think it's naive, because people like Genghis Khan existed in history. People have existed in history where their whole thing was to conquer and destroy as much stuff as they could conquer and destroy. And the reason these kinds of villains are cool is that they have these almost heroic-ish qualities. They have strength, they have command, they have charisma, they have drive and courage, but they devote that towards an evil and destructive end. So we look at these villains and they're cool because we could imagine them as heroes with the qualities and the brilliance and the strength that they possess, but then they devote that to the destruction of life. And so Redwall, even though Redwall is medieval-ish, I wouldn't call it an Ivanhoe story. I'd call it sort of an Indiana Jones-ish adventure story where the knights in shining armor is more dressing than it's not really trying to represent the medieval mindset at all. Like, they're supposed to be in an abbey, kind of like monks, but there really isn't a religion. There isn't really that much world building. They're fun adventures, and every Redwall book is built on a formula. So if you like Redwall, you'll probably like all the other books because they follow the Redwall formula pretty closely. Check out Redwall, Matameo, and Mossflower, the first trilogy, and I think you'll have a good vibe for some of the best of the series. Now, the reason I'm connecting Redwall with Zootopia is it potentially brings up topics of racism too, but Redwall may potentially be one of the most red-pilled series of books ever, and it took me years to realize this because I didn't even, the language of red-pilled only showed up in memes last year. What I mean is that it has a view of morality and a view of war that is counter-cultural to to most other forms of narrative. In most other forms of narrative, pacifism is celebrated, but in Redwall, aggressive self-defense is celebrated. I almost think the theme of the first Redwall book is that the abbot is weak and he cares too much about the lives of those who threaten his abbey and his people. And Matthias rises to the occasion to rescue Redwall through his use of violence to defend innocent life. I don't know whether you'd call it neoconservative or libertarian. It's kind of a weird mix of both. No, that's not right. There's this division in the Republican Party between sort of the isolationists and the interventionists. And the interventionists are called neoconservatives. The isolationists are a little bit more libertarian, a little bit more Trumpish. They were the ones who were kind of unhappy with Trump over Syria. And somehow Redwall touches on both aspects, because the mice of Redwall, they don't go looking for trouble. Trouble finds them. And in some of the other books, it's not the mice of Redwall. Sometimes it's the badgers of Salamandastron. But the protagonists always use violent methods to defend themselves, and they are aggressive in how they wage warfare. And here is my bus, and it doesn't care. Dang it. I missed my bus, or it just doesn't care I'm here. So I got a little more time. When I was a little kid, I read people say that Redwall is racist, and I kind of rolled my eyes and said, oh, they're looking into this too much. And the reason people said Redwall is racist is the species of the animals almost always determines whether they're good or evil. Rats are evil. Mice are good. Otters are good. Weasels are evil. Badgers are good. And I kind of understood even as a kid that this was more about just using animals as a generic idea. Foxes are cunning. Badgers are strong. Otters swim well, right? And it's not like Jake Weiss is trying to say anything about race. I mean, it doesn't make sense for badgers to be inherently good guys, because badgers would probably eat a lot of woodland creatures in real life. But it makes sense in the context of his story, because Jake Weiss is using animal characters to be the equivalent of essentially being from a different region of the world, or having a different accent or something. But later, when I was in my teenage years, I read The Outcast of Redwall. And The Outcast of Redwall made me question whether there might be some substance to the accusation that the Redwall series almost have a racist vibe to them. The reason I say that is The Outcast of Redwall is about a character who is, I think, the son of a stoat or a weasel. And his father is an evil warlord, just like Clooney the Scourge. And the Outcast, I don't even remember his name because this was years ago, but the Outcast of Redwall is separated from his father and raised in Redwall. And the way you'd expect the story to go in any Hollywood version is that the son of the evil lord is raised by good people, he becomes a good person and becomes a hero and defeats his father, and that's not what happens. The Outcast of Redwall is a wicked young man. And it is said directly that this is due to his parentage. This is due to his blood. So there's a genetic reason why the Outcast of Redwall is evil, in spite of being raised in the best possible environment by the most moral possible people. He commits some act of violence or bullying and is thrown out of Redwall, and he seeks out his father. And at the end, he seems to redeem himself by trying to attack his father and save someone. But even after the Outcast of Redwall is dead, the mice, the creatures of Redwall don't seem to... They seem to still think of him as an evil person, even after he's died. And that gave me a real bad taste in my mouth as a kid, because it felt like they were saying that you were doomed to good or evil based on genetic factors beyond your control. And now that I'm looking back on it, what I think Jake Weiss might have been trying to say is that nurture isn't enough to take the evil out of certain people. Some people will decide to be evil no matter how well you raise them or how well you bring them up to be good. And that worldview that his morality and his way of looking at the world affects the tone of all the Redwall books and makes you think about them, even though the general tone of the books is they're kind of just fun kids action adventure stories, with puzzles and great purple prose. I think that Jaques was my first time knowing what purple prose was and loving it. So he won't just say the bad guys are sailing, he'll say thunder cracked against the clouds while the ropes strained in the sails. He's loving it. He's like, Brian Jaques is like your cool old grandpa who just makes up an awesome story for you at bedtime, and he's really getting into it. So there was a cartoon series that was just okay. It's an okay cartoon, but I don't think it lives up to the spark and the energy of the books. So I recommend you get the books on tape. Man, that shows how old I am. Get the audiobooks on Audible. And they have a full cast, usually of British actors, portraying all the characters, doing accents, different types of British accents or Yorkshire accents for the characters. It's a big, full production, and I love those books when I was a kid. I've revisited them, and they're still good. They're simple kid stories, but they are still really good, really solid kid stories. And I think they'll give you a different perspective on war and heroism than Disney might, and that's the substance of this point. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan, keeping it short, fighting off those tangents, catching you later.